모스트 포던 팟캐스트.
Welcome to the Most Modern Podcast. We have a special guest today, Betty Chen. She is a current student at the Boston Architectural College, and she wears many hats. She is a project manager at Gensler. She has her own YouTube channel called The Articulations that gained 88,000 followers. And she also did a TED Talk titled Smashing the Ivory Tower of Art. Welcome, Betty.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited. It seems like I do a lot of things. Sometimes I forget.
So, Betty, tell us about your journey. You are a current student, but you also are practicing architect, and you, as
Mhm,
mentioned, you are running your own YouTube channel. How
mhm,
did this all get together? Like, were you always interested in this multifaceted approach in design careers or in
mhm.
architecture?
Yeah, actually, I think a lot of things that happen in my career and probably life in general are really unexpected. Yeah, I have plans, as people in general may expect. Like things don't always work out, or things don't always end up where you'd expect. I think when I was a kid, I the one thing I really wanted to do was I always said to my family and my friends I wanted to be an artist. And
Hmm.
of course my parents are always like, okay, but you don't make any money that way. Have you ever heard of starving artists? Because that's just what they are. I mean, that's what they always told me. But so, in my mind, I guess I just thought, okay, that's not a viable career option, which is not true. But I didn't know that as a
Hmm.
kid. So yeah, I think so I am currently a student, but I also I'm in grad school, but I did my undergraduate like 15, 16 years ago. I can't even count at this point. And so I have been working, working in architecture, the design industry, doing a bunch of different jobs for 14 years. And then I decided to go back to grad school about 2.5 years ago, and
Hmm.
I'm still there, but still working full time. And the school that I go to, the BAC, Boston Architectural College, is kind of known for this, where like a lot of people that you work or you have been working for many years, and you
Hmm.
continue to work and you go to school. And I kind of really like that. That wasn't a thing that I knew about when I was younger, or that I expect. Like, I always think, oh, you go to school and then you go to more school and then you graduate and then you get a job and whatever, you work your way up, which could still be a option for many people, and it's still fine. But I think for me, doing a lot of different things and having experience, or dabbling in a bunch of different aspects of a lot of different disciplines,
Hmm.
is actually helpful in my career, in my job, especially doing architecture. So yeah, that's kind of, I guess, a general reason for why so many, like, there's kind of, I think, like a non-linear trajectory to my career path in general. And yeah, so I have one more semester of school left, and I definitely think that's enough school for me after. But I think one of the reasons, I decided to go back to school, and another, like, um, the relationship I now have with education is that I really believe that you never stop learning. And that's also kind of why I started my YouTube channel, which was really just because I was learning a lot of things. And then that's a way for me to share things. I'll get into a little bit more detail of why that started in the first place, because there's kind of like a random story about that too. but
Hmm.
I think one of the reasons that I continued to do it is that, whether it's going to school, whether it's just taking classes or making YouTube channels, I think it's all about just learning new things.
Why don't we dive
Mhm.
into kind of that origin
Yeah.
story? Because I think when
Yeah.
we were talking before this, you had a very
Hmm.
clear kind of origin story of what
Yeah.
precipitated not only your interest in like being a content creator, but also, being an educator through that medium. So can
Mhm.
you kind of give us that origin story?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this earlier this year, and I realized I've actually been doing my YouTube channel for 10 years now. It's been
Wow.
sort of on and off. Yeah, and it at the same time feels like I've been doing it forever, but also I still feel like new because I don't
Hmm.
know, like almost everyone who is doing this type of content creation thing on the internet, we're probably just like, I'm sure you guys know, you just kind of start doing something like you're not, and I don't know, maybe kids these days like have being a YouTuber as a career in their mind, but definitely not, not before because YouTube didn't exist. But yeah, so essentially, about 10 years ago, I was, I was working at my first job and I was doing design for retail stores. And, it was a really cool and fun job. But I think I was a little bit bored because I was just, going to work, coming home every day. And unlike in school where I was in clubs and different activities and hanging out with friends and then having a part-time job, it felt really like monotonous, just kind of doing one thing for, supposedly 8 hours, but really it was 12. And then and then just working so much. And
Yeah, we
anyway,
all know that story.
I know. Exactly. So yeah, then one day, so I was I went to the Art Gallery of Ontario. I was living in Toronto at the time, and I was there with my boyfriend at the time, and he had never been there before, and I had been there many times because, as I mentioned, I really liked art as a kid, and I love visiting art galleries, and still do to this day. And we were walking around, and I was just telling him about some of the artwork that I knew about. And yeah, and I guess I was just really passionate about it because, I love art, that's expected. And as I was talking, a lot of people gathered around me, and they were like, they started listening. And then some people, I guess, thought that I worked there. So, kind of listen to the whole thing. And then people started asking me questions. And then I realized one person, like, I guess just asked or thought I was an employee. And I was like, no, 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 I'm just a visitor. I don't work here. I didn't mean to mislead. But then this person was like, well, you should. I mean, you seem to really know what you're talking about. And I was like, oh, this is awesome, very very flattering. But then I didn't really think too much about it until a few days later, my boyfriend at the time sent me a link to the AGO's website that they were hiring for gallery guides.
Mhm.
So I ended up applying, and it was a volunteer position, but again, I was working full time, and I wanted something to do on the weekends. I ended up it actually was a really hard interview process. Like I had to go through 2 rounds of interviews and do like a presentation, basically like talk about an artwork, uh, as if I was a gallery guide. Thankfully, I supposedly already had experience, like even though I had never been a gallery guide before. So yeah, like it was honestly, it was harder than a job interview. So, and I ended up getting the position, which was really great. So I was at the time a gallery guide on Saturdays, and I would have trainings like Wednesday nights, and then I would go to the gallery and do everything from highlights tours to special collection tours to we had these things called pop-up talks where you talk about one painting for like 10 minutes and have kind of a conversation with the visitors. And at the time I wasn't super used to public speaking. I had actually I grew up in China, and when I moved to Canada, I actually didn't speak any English,
Mm.
and so it took me a few years just to learn how to speak regularly. So doing public speaking was probably one of the scariest things that I ever had to do. I was more afraid of public speaking than dying, like
Mhm.
literally. So it was kind of a surprise to me in a way that I would even sign up for something like that where you have to talk in front of people. But thankfully in the beginning, I only had to talk in front of a group of like 3 or 4 people, maybe 5 or 6 people. And it was about topics that I was passionate about. It's not like in school where you have to present something you don't, or sometimes you don't care about or aren't super familiar with, but it was something that I felt confident in. So it was a really good way to slowly build up your confidence and your skills in speaking. Eventually, I was switched to volunteering on Friday nights, which was actually a very busy time in the art gallery that I didn't realize. I ended up at some point leading tours of like 20, 30, at one point almost 50 people. I
Wow.
think after that, after the time where I led 50 people, I was told actually the fire marshal doesn't allow that many people in some of these rooms. So we had to split them up and cap the tour limits. Like it helped me speak to more people and again like build up that experience a little bit more, to a point where, as you mentioned previously, about like 3 years after that, I was invited back to the school that I went to for my undergrad, Ryerson University, to do a TED Talk there.
Hmm.
And it was mostly about being a gallery guide, but at the time I had actually also started my YouTube channel, which I'll get to in a moment. But yeah, so at TED Talk, I had to present in front of, I think it was something like 800 people, maybe like almost 1,000 people. That was definitely very scary, but again, it was a really good experience to have. But one of the reasons that I ended up recording myself talking was because both when I was training for the role at the art gallery, as well as when I was practicing for the TED Talk, advice that a lot of people gave was you should record yourself talking about whatever topic you're presenting. This way you can watch yourself back and basically kind of evaluate yourself, things
Mhm.
that you wouldn't see by like being inside yourself. And so yeah, I started doing that, and I actually ended up with a lot of just footage of myself talking about art topics. And at the AGO, I also eventually started doing an architecture tour. It's a really old building, well, like well, not a really old building, but like depending on what you consider really old, it was like over 100 years old, so but pretty old for Toronto. And so yeah, I was presenting, about the old house that it was in, and then the different architectural styles that was in the buildings that were eventually added to the property. And so, I had some design related topics too in the recordings that I was doing. And I decided, why let all this footage go to waste? I was watching educational YouTube channels at the time. I'm a big fan. I was a big fan, and still I'm a big fan of Crash Course. It was one of the first educational shows that I watched, and so I knew it was a thing that people did. And obviously, my quality is nowhere near that, but I did it anyway. And I just started uploading the videos. They were really poor quality. I think I had like an iPhone 3 or something, and I was at the footage, and I was using the front camera, so the footage was really grainy and terrible. And yeah, the audio was just through the phone. But yeah, like I continued doing that. The topics were mostly about art and the art works and shows that I was presenting at the time at the
Mhm.
AGO. So a lot of my early videos are about those exhibitions. And then eventually I started to do more architecture and design related topics. So then, um, yeah, like I would say for the longest time, I had like a a pretty small amount of viewership. It was something between like maybe like 100 people to like 500, which like was not small to me at the time. And it was really um it was really great to have anyone watching, really. And but when I started doing more videos about design, that was kind of when, I guess you could say, the channel itself took off, where I was getting like a lot more people watching and a lot more engagement. And so eventually I kind of just more so focused on the art sorry eventually I'm more so focused on the design related topics, and that's how eventually I, even though my channel is called Articulations, and it still is, and I still talk about art, it more so focuses on the architecture and designing things in the real world aspects of art. But I think that having that background in art and talking about design, I at least the goal I have is through this holistic lens, is still the, I guess, theme that I try to have with the videos that I still make. And yeah, I think it's just like over time I just I actually I met a lot of different people, like other YouTubers, and a lot of that influenced what I did, what I ended up doing. And yeah, that's what I still do to this day, except not super frequently currently, because as previously mentioned, I am in grad school. So I now maybe upload a couple times a year. The idea is to get back into making more videos after I graduate. But yeah, like that's kind of the overall gist of how I got here.
Yeah, so we covered a lot of ground, I think,
Yeah.
from, you finding your confidence to finding your voice to kind of finding your audience and now kind
Mhm.
of finding your community. So I guess for you, was public
Mhm.
speaking something you've always wanted to work on, and kind of
Mhm.
that starting point kind of took you on this journey? Or was that kind of a surprise? You're like, oh, wait, this is something that I can actually do. And now you're kind of this voice and this creator.
Yeah, I think it was sort of a thing that I wanted to work on, but also a surprise at the same time. I did consciously think about the fact that I probably shouldn't be afraid to death every time I have to speak in front of someone, because I was aware that depending on what I did, there's going to be there are going to be situations where I have to talk in front of people, and probably, and even when I was in school, my professor said you're going to have to do presentations at work, so
Mhm.
you got to at least know how to do that, and expect that that could happen. So I was aware that this was something I needed to work on, but like anything you fear, it's I also didn't want to work on it. And yeah, it was a hard thing to step into. And so and anytime, of course, like when you ask people, oh, how do I get over the fear of public speaking, how do I get better at speaking, you're just told, well, you just need to do it more. But that's easier said than done. And if you just randomly go to some public speaking or decide to sign up for some public speaking thing, it's not always the easiest to do, and it might scare you more into not wanting to do it anymore in the future. And that's why I said that doing the speaking as a gallery guide, again, I didn't expect it to be the thing that would be kind of the catalyst in getting to it was a surprise to me that that was something that yeah, eventually would lead to speaking in front of like 1,000 people
Mhm.
for a tech talk. So yeah, so I think looking back now, like if someone were to ask me, or if I were to rephrase the advice of to my younger self, it would be not just do it more, but do it in something that you're really interested in, that you're really passionate about, because then it more or less comes naturally. Because I felt like even when I was first starting to speak at the AGO, I really like, I was nervous, but I wasn't at the same time. It felt more like a conversation. It felt more, I just wanted to do it more. So
Mhm.
I think that's what was a surprising thing to discover.
So, Betty, you're a great talker, and I believe your ability and how you developed your level of speech is heavily rooted on your interest in the subject. So that makes me wonder, like, what type of art are you
Mhm.
very interested in, or
Mhm.
are you more of a generalist? Do you like everything, or do you have a favorite artist?
Yeah, I actually, I would say More or less, I lean towards the I like everything. I am more of a generalist, and obviously there are artists that I'm less, more or less interested in. But I think working at the gallery where my job was to talk about pretty much everything that was in the collection, the highlights tour. The point of it is to talk about a variety of everything. The AGO had collections, or still has collections from, all over the world, from like really, really old stuff that was from like hundreds or, hundreds or maybe almost 1,000 years ago. I'm not sure. Some stuff was from like the 1200s, and to modern day stuff that would have just come into the collection recently, that was done a couple years ago. And so I really kind of learned to like everything, even if I didn't previously. I do have, I guess, favorite artists, plural, and it always changes. But an artist that I really loved for years is Yayoi Kusama, who's a contemporary artist who has done a lot of different types of works, from paintings to sculptures to like experiences of these like infinity rooms. And yeah, and in a way, like I really like the fact that she had such a variety of things that she did throughout her life, and a long career as well. But yeah, as you can see, I also have like art around me. So I like everything from anime to move like films with real people in them. So yeah, and then I think before working at the AGO, I was less knowledgeable about more experimental artworks that are experiences and community participation types of artworks, like artworks that people like. I used to, probably be like most people walk into an art gallery where you look at a box and you're like, how is this art and why is it here? But over time, I've learned about why some of those things are there, and believe me, there are reasons. And if you watch some articulations episodes, I can, I could inform you of the reasons they're there. Whether people like them, whether they're good, I think is a different conversation than why an artwork is important. And so yeah, so I think there's the interest probably started with, there were certain types of artworks that I like. It just so happened at the time when I first started working at AGO that I really liked Canadian Impressionism, and there's like a million paintings in the AGO of artists like the Group of Seven and Tom Thompson there. But it's funny because over time, I don't know if I was just exposed to too many of them, I kind of got bored of them. I still think they're amazing artworks, but it got me to discover a lot of other things. But yeah, like I think, I can like something like a romantic landscape from the 1800s in Europe, to, like going into a Kusama infinity room. And I wish I can be in them for hours, but generally when you're in there, you can be in it for 30 seconds, which is unfortunate, but it just shows you how popular they are, because there's like hundreds of people waiting to get in. So
I'm curious though, since you have in your roles, both as a docent but also as a creator, you're trying to basically communicate art to people. And like you said, sometimes art and also design, architecture, built environment can be a little bit opaque to the general public. From your perspective, what are people curious about? And then how do you respond to them?
Yeah, I think one of my goals is I want to dispel the myth that the art and architecture design worlds are opaque and meant to be elitist. Not to like spoil my whole TED talk, but like that of a big part of that was about community participation and about the importance of people, and everyday common people, not just artists, not just designers, engaging with art and being a part of art. I think one thing to talk about the art side for a moment is I think the thing I just like want to encourage people, if you're going to an art gallery or looking at artworks in general, is to just be curious, just ask questions. I used to be more dismissive. If I see something I don't like, I'm just like, well, this clearly isn't interesting because I don't like it. But one thing that really one artwork that got me to stop being like that and just be a bit more curious. There isn't just one, there's a lot of artworks that have piqued my curiosity over the years. So an artist that I discovered years back is this artist called Felix Gonzalez Torres. And I think the first artwork I saw was just a pile of paper on the ground that you're supposed to take a piece and walk away with it. And I was like, okay, well, whatever, sure. I mean, like, that's cool. You usually don't get to touch. Please don't touch art, by the way, in the art galleries. I see it happen all the time, unless you are explicitly told you're allowed to do it. So that one you can. And I didn't think much of it until I discovered another artwork of his, which is there's a pile of candy and you can take away the pile of candy. And I didn't realize at the time, but like it gets replenished when it's almost gone. And you don't have to think too much about it. I think that in itself is interesting, is cool. People get to participate. But I realized later when I learned is that artwork was about his late partner who passed away because of AIDS complications. And the pile of candy was supposed to represent his body weight when it's full. And when it's taken away, it represented his weight just going down as he got more and more sick and kind of just became, a very frail person until he eventually passed away. There's a lot of different ways to interpret that artwork. Like, I kind of saw it as like his life force was being chipped away, both like physically and metaphorically. And like I just thought that was it was a very sad story, but it was also very beautiful, and it was represented in such an interesting way that engaged with people. And so, like, that's why I think I encourage people to not discourage things, because if I had just thought, oh, this is a weird modern art that makes no sense, I wouldn't have got to learn such a beautiful story, and also such an important story, about kind of the history of the LGBTQ community was really important and is still really important to this day. So I think, like I would just, I think that's a story that actually that brings people like into the art world instead of being opaque, instead of being kind of totally elitist. It's the complete opposite of that. And so and that's why I think like some things that are initially perceived as being inaccessible to a common average viewer who might not be a part of the art world, it is actually not that. But you have to give it a chance, because if you don't, you miss out on something that's really beautiful and interesting.
Is that the same for architecture and design?
Yeah. So I think for architecture and design, it is a little bit different, but also similar. And so I made a video a few years ago about modern architecture, and I talk about how there's our theories about like you kind of have to approach architecture a bit differently from art, because an artwork you can put it on your wall, or even if someone comes to your house and they don't like it, they can choose to just not look at it. Or if you really don't like something, you can just not put it up on your wall, you can just not buy the art. But everyone has to live everyone has to look at some form of architecture or interior design. Like, you're either inside or outside of a building usually, and so people have to live in it and experience it, and be in public and private. So there needs to be a little bit more consideration, of course, to how people perceive architecture and how they experience it, than just, oh, I made this artwork and it's just for me, or it's just for some people, or it's just to express something, and that's not necessarily pleasant. That is not to say that architecture always has to be pleasant, but that's a bigger consideration. But I do think it also is something that people should give a chance, because when I started school, one of the first classes I had, my professor here at the BAC, a question they asked the whole class was, "What's your favorite building?" Or like, "What's one of your favorite buildings?" Just like talk about it. And I said, "My favorite building is Boston City Hall," and everyone was like, "Are you insane?"
Even in architecture school?
Well, yes, exactly.
Wow.
So, well, not everyone. There were some people that's like, "Oh, yeah, me too." But so it's a very controversial topic. Still to this day, apparently. And so like they asked, obviously, like, explain why, and I said, it's one of my favorite buildings, like, if not the favorite building, because the first time I saw it, which was about like, yeah, like 16 years ago, I thought it was the ugliest building I had ever seen. So it started out as my least favorite building. And over time, I learned more about it. I learned what brutalism was, and I learned about kind of the backstory of the Boston City Hall, which also did not help making it a building that I liked more, because it kind of, it did erase a lot of the communities on the site that it was built on. And so, it actually kind of got worse before it got better. But then, I learned about how the people, or a lot of the people who were making buildings that would be today called brutalism, they didn't mean to start a movement or anything at the time, but it really was about trying to like make things relate more to the context, and pay more attention to like, kind of civic and public life. And at the time, modernism, a lot of it was about like erasing historic references and things like that. And you might think Boston City Hall still looks like it erases historic references, but I will just, I'll leave that to people's interpretations. But this building itself actually has a lot of references to like ratios and proportions of classical orders, and which, I wouldn't have known until I learned more about architecture over time. And so, yeah, it in a way, it grew on me, and it also relates to my own probably experiences. So as I mentioned, I grew up in China, and we have, where I lived, had a lot of big concrete buildings. Again, not all of them pleasant, a lot of them rather unpleasant, but I think a part of it's like the history of it, like things it reminds me of, and just learning about its complexities and intricacies. Like over time, it just, there's just so much about it and so many things about it that it evokes for me, that it became one of my favorite buildings. I also think there's a right way to do big concrete buildings and a wrong way to do it. This one I happen to think has a lot of, natural light and great, articulations. So it worked out, but definitely I understand if some people still hate it. But yeah, so I think that's also a surprising story, and a surprising thing, that something that I thought was probably like the worst thing, it's not necessarily the best thing now, but it became something that I really loved, and also, to my surprise, I now work across the street from it and can see it every day if I want to. So yeah.
I guess as a communicator of art, it seems like, there's a respect for like the subjective view, like whether you like something, but then also an attention to the objective. Like as you learn more, as you understand more about how this thing came to be, you do change kind of your subjective view. So when you're communicating art or architecture or design to an audience, what are some of the major points you try to hit on to try to change or grow an audience's subjective appreciation?
I do think when it comes to communicating topics, whether it's art or architecture, it kind of it depends on what it is. And I think sometimes when I talk about how I come up with a topic or how I write a script for a video, the key thing or the main thing that I find is I don't actually know where the video is going to end up when I first think of something. Sometimes a topic changes, or the way I communicate a topic changes as I'm writing or as I'm researching and as I'm writing the script. And then ultimately the video that gets made, yeah, it might be in a very different place than when I first started. And that's because like I'm a lot of times I'm learning about a topic too, even if it's a topic that I think I know a lot about. I discover so many things along the way. And so in a way, the communication in the videos and in these talks is kind of just me sharing what I learned and how I learned it and what I thought was interesting and what I thought are the most important aspects. So it's not always communicated the same way. And so I think, yeah, I think that's in general how I try to approach it. Like I don't really have a structure of what types of key points to hit on. It's more like what um yeah, like what I think is interesting. And I try to approach topics not just by saying, oh, this is brutalism and here are the movements and here are like the people. Like I try to make it more like a question. And in my video about brutalism, which I now made many years ago with really poor audio quality, it was just I rode my bike past Robarts Library in Toronto for years, and it was just me like kind of discovering all these brutalist buildings in Toronto over time, and like me rediscovering like Boston City Hall and realizing I liked it and how that was a shock. And a lot, yeah, like I guess I tell a lot of things in the storytelling type of way, because I it engages me, so I hope that it also engages other people. But I think, when it comes to YouTube, there's also a like you need to think about what will make people click on the video, and that doesn't always mean like clickbaiting people, or it shouldn't mean clickbaiting people, obviously. Like I want the topic to also be that someone will look at that and be like, actually, I am curious about that. And again, that goes back to what I think I'm curious about, but also is like, because I want to speak more to a general public audience rather than just architects and designers. I want to think about more like if someone is not actively in the art or architecture world, what they might think is something that they would want to learn.
Do you think that approach is what actually exploded the viewership from several hundred to now 80,000?
Yeah, it's yeah, I mean, it's possible, but I guess I didn't expect this many people, so it wasn't intentional. Obviously I had always hoped, but and I'm very thankful for that. But yeah, I think like unfortunately with YouTube, sometimes the engagement is like kind of like brutalism is not always positive. And the brutalism video was one of the ones that became really popular, and it obviously, well, maybe not so obvious, it became popular because a lot of people still hated it. Like
I think it's like a bogeyman.
Yeah.
Brutalism in general in the popular conscience.
Totally. And that's the thing is like, I would say is like YouTube is not the best place. In fact, sometimes it could be the worst place. Like most of that video are like comments are people are haters, like are people who hate brutalism. And then some people decided that because they hate brutalism, they hate me because I'm talking about it. And so similar to like my video about modern architecture, even though I actually in the video talk about why certain modern architecture pieces, modern architecture is bad and that I don't even like it, people still hate it so much that, like, again, most of the engagement is unfortunately from people talking about how much they hate architecture, or how much they hate modern architecture, and I guess in turn architecture as a whole. So like the unfortunate part is a lot of the engagement, not all of it, but a lot of the engagement comes from negativity. And that's just how the algorithm works, which is unfortunate. That is not to say that, you should try to cultivate negativity, because that's definitely very bad for your mental health and just society in general. So like I try to be positive, and I try to avoid that type of engagement. So, like, which is why, like, because if I wanted, like, even more followers, I could continue to tap into that. There's a lot of videos I can make about why things suck, but I consciously choose to not go down that path.
Do these haters, do they say why they hate this stuff?
I mean, sometimes, but the problem with with YouTube comments is they're everything from just the dumbest thing to the most useless thing to I have had like novels of comments. Like, I don't know what the character limit is for YouTube comments, but it's too much, because there are comments that I never read, because I'm just like, I'm not reading all of that. Like, there are some ones where like there would be like a scroll bar and it's a dissertation about why they hate something, but I don't know, because I was like, I'm not reading all that.
It must be really personal though. And to your previous point, like architecture and buildings, they're public.
Yeah.
Even if you don't design it for one person, somebody else might come experience and have a really intense reaction to it.
Yeah, well, exactly. So, and that's why I'm a little bit more forgiving of people who have a strong reaction to architecture, because, yeah, again, if you have to be in it and it's something that really, it wasn't a positive experience for you, then I think that, that's definitely valid, and how they express it might not be sometimes, but I think, it is personal for a lot of people, and I think, now that I've worked in an architecture company for a number of years, I realize one thing, like, you really have to just be aware of and know is that, yeah, you can't please everyone, even if you're just designing a small office for a few people. Like, there's going to be like 10 people and like 20 opinions. And, I'm working on some projects right now where, yeah, like, we're not going to make everyone happy. Even if we try our best to design something in the most holistic way that considers, as many people as possible, like, someone's always gonna be left out, just, of the nature of, you just can't do everything. And also some things there are no compromise on. If one person likes it, another person is not going to. So I think, like, that's really hard to deal with, I think, at first, especially, you're in school and you're kind of just making designs, like, without really a user and an audience, which is hard enough already. But then when you get out into the practicing world and you're you're actually designing for people. Unfortunately, you're not always designing for the end users, your client. I worked on a lot of hospital projects. The patients are unfortunately very often not a part of the design working groups. I think these days they try to have patient engagements for a lot of projects, but yeah, again, you're not, like, if someone is in the hospital right now, they're not going to be capable of coming to your meetings. And so, yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and that's something, I think I continue to think about how I can do better and how we can do better as an industry. And so there may be more video topics.
About the two audiences that you kind of engage, like, well, you were the gallery guide, right?
Yeah,
people were kind of self-selecting, right? They had to come to the gallery. They probably had some initial interest in art. They're in person, you can see them respond to what you say. But on YouTube, it's kind of totally different. You record the content, you upload it, and then someone's, sitting on their couch in their underwear hating on your content. Right? So how do you engage with these two audiences differently?
Yeah, I think it definitely is a very different setting, and yeah, engaging with these different audiences in a way are different. But I would just say the difference is that some people I just don't engage with, because it's very tempting to tell these people why they are wrong. But,
Yeah.
But really the right answer is always don't engage if there's, toxicity. And, I haven't always, or I definitely don't always follow that rule, unfortunately. So there's a difference, but I would say there's also a consistency. I do think, still at the end of the day, even if someone is being toxic, like I try to remember that whether you're in person talking to someone in real life or if you're on the internet, that like, everyone deserves respect, and everyone, if you are to engage with someone, again, I in the past I haven't always followed this rule, but now I try to, is like, you need to treat them the same way. You need to treat them with the same level of respect and same, like have the same considerations. And really, if everyone followed this, you wouldn't have all the people who are not not being respectful. But I feel like if I try to at least be this way, then that's one less person on the internet who's just, as you said, sitting on their couch in their underwear hating on everything. So
Yeah, unfortunately, negativity is the biggest motivator for people to come out and speak. And that happens everywhere, not just in online settings like YouTube, but community meetings.
Oh yes, I've actually been attending community meetings in my neighborhood for architecture and planning projects. And yeah, they I mean, sometimes I just sit back and listen, because sometimes it's like watching a drama or something.
From your perspective as a creator trying to inform the public about the built environment, what do you think could maybe improve that situation? How could we make people more informed?
Yeah, I've actually been thinking about this question a lot, and I do think different media and content platforms, whether it's podcasts or YouTube, or I'm not on TikTok, but apparently it's a thing. I don't know. But these types of tools where we can engage a wider audience is very, very useful, because like, I think traditionally a lot of people in the architecture industry, they might go speak at conferences, they might go maybe even like be on get interviewed for like a newspaper or a television show or something like that, and those will reach a certain level of general audience, but really I think like not nearly as the audience that you could engage in through social media. I mean, social media you could also literally engage no one, obviously. So but there's just such a broad spectrum of how much how much you can reach with that content. And so that's kind of why I think I think there should just be more people and more voices talking about all kinds of different things. And I try to like in the videos and things that I create, again, just make it be more about just like sharing information and sharing what I know and what I've learned, because again, it's a lot of it is my perspective. It may not be the same as other people's, but I do think I think I have some value to share. So, and when I talked to you guys previously, I had mentioned that like I not only career wise, I had a non-linear trajectory. I also, like I was talking to before, I moved to the U.S. Like 2.5 years ago when I started school, and yeah, there's a lot of international students and international people in the U.S., and it's it's not always the easiest place to navigate. I've met a lot of amazing people like you guys, but there's also a lot of challenges, and people come here from all over the world, from all kinds of different backgrounds, and there's not one way to navigate life and your profession here. And so sometimes I just talk about like, this is how I'm approaching things, or this is how I'm doing things, or these are some of the challenges that I've experienced, and these are some of the potential solutions, but then also I'm just figuring it out, and I don't have answers to a lot of things either. And I think that's or like some people have told me like that's helpful, and that's helpful to hear about and learn about and talk about. And yeah, and one thing, sorry, I didn't mention was that I used to do a podcast, and that's what the mug that I have right now that I'm
Nice.
drinking my hot chocolate from because I quit coffee. That's another story. And so a number of years ago, someone who I'm now friends with, her name is Quinn Rose. She's she was at the time a podcast editor for a lot of different podcasts on this network called Relay FM, and they have they more so at the time had like tech related podcasts, but then they were doing more like art related conversations on some of their podcasts, as well as having podcasts on the network that are more related to art and design and things like that. And so, yeah, she asked me if I was interested in talking about art. And I'm like, yeah, I am. How did you know? So, and we started a podcast called Pictorial, and we did it for 4 years, and where, because I had pivoted to more talking about architecture and design topics on articulations, the podcast was kind of a way for me to, and Quinn, to casually talk about art. It's a little bit less of a like a formal and edited medium than YouTube videos, or at least the type of YouTube videos that I was making, which is, between like 6 to 12 minute, relatively concise summaries of topics, whereas the podcast, we can be more conversational and be more casual. And so yeah, like that was another way to talk about things and to communicate. And again, in school right now. So, and Quinn also went back to school as well. So we were both like, there's no way we have time to do this, because our podcast was on a more or less bi-weekly release schedule. So that was definitely not going to happen after we both went back to school. But yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I also ended up talking about design related topics as well on Pictorial. Yeah, sorry, that was kind of a tangent from the question you were asking, but I think basically, yeah, I mean, actually, this is probably also a question back to you guys, which is, you're doing a podcast, and like, do you have thoughts about, like, why you choose to communicate in this medium?
We definitely do. We talk about that a lot.
Yeah.
One is, I think it's accessible, right? Like,
Yeah.
you don't have to read, you don't have to look. You just put the earbuds in and you listen while you're doing the laundry, or you're walking around, or you're working on your studio project. I think that that's important, to be able to have a little bit more of a conversational medium, like you talked about before, Betty, as opposed to some of the more, let's say, high level, somewhat inaccessible ways that we communicate across design worlds and in the built environment. Either you have to be in person in a particular place listening to a lecture at a school or at a museum, or you need to read a book and you need to know what not only what brutalism is, but also what Siam is, and modernism, and all these things that, unless you went through and did 2 years of architecture theory, it might be hard to get to the point. Or on the other side of things, like, maybe it's really complicated and technical, like you need to know exactly what BIM is and these sorts of things. And I think that we're really trying to make the conversation, although it's about complicated things, a little bit more accessible and just a little bit more sort of baseline. Like, we want to dumb it down in a way so that we can increase the flow of conversation across different people, either in architecture, in construction, in development planning, in policy, in whatnot.
I think one thing we talked about is, like, why do we choose an audio medium for something that's so visual? And it's a kind of constant challenge we face whenever we come upon a topic we have to try to describe in great detail. But on the other hand, it does create that intimacy with the audience. And it's almost like a piece of subterfuge where they don't have that initial visceral reaction to what they're seeing, and we can kind of reason them into this piece of learning.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Lebo, actually, it's funny you mentioned that. When we started the podcast, when we started Pictorial, I think the one of the founders of Relay, I'm like paraphrasing what he said, is like, when we pitched the idea to him, Mike, he was like, oh, I love this idea because it's a podcast that shouldn't be a podcast. So because because we talk a lot about art, and so many of our episodes we spend like half an hour just describing what we're seeing, but it led us to kind of interesting places too, because we realized, or actually by we I mean Quinn, she realized at one point you can put chapter artworks in the podcast, and she was like, oh, why don't we just put like the painting or the sculpture or whatever it is as the chapter artwork, so if you're not like driving, obviously, if you can just like look over at your phone while you're walking or working on a project or something, you can see at least like a little thumbnail of what we're talking about, so you have a little bit more context. And actually, a few years ago, Apple Podcasts featured us as like an example of how to use chapter artworks like in a creative way.
Nice.
And again, I'm like, it was all Quinn. Like, she came up with the idea. Like, I didn't even know that was an option. And so yeah, an interesting surprise of how you can communicate and engage in that way. Kind of, Lebo, like you said, we realized later as we were doing it that a part of the engagement is the describing. At the AGO, I didn't do these tours because you had to be like specially trained, but they actually for longest time offered I forget the name of the tour, but it's basically one of the accessibility tours, which is made for people who are blind and with visual impairments. So that's where you can put on like the special conservation gloves where you are allowed to touch things that you normally wouldn't be allowed to touch, but then also you're being led on these tours where the gallery guys are describing things to you, through words. And that's that tour, I remember like at the time, like it was a huge thing. And not only and I think you don't have to be blind to go on the tour. You can just go on the tour, but you have to sign up, but you have to obviously promise that you'll wear the gloves. And it's, and I went on the tour once, and it was just like, it was one of the most interesting tours that I had ever been on. And it was so eye-opening, no pun intended. And so, but it also, it's accessible. It provides, I didn't like, because for the longest time, I'm like, oh, well, maybe, yeah, people who can't see, they just can't come onto one of our tours because they literally can't see anything. But like, I was totally wrong, because they could, and they do. So
one question I have, and this is something when we started the show that we wanted to try to move towards, was, you look at cooking, you look at fashion, you can go on Netflix and watch shows, competitions, and it's entertainment.
Yeah.
How can we make the built environment more fun and entertaining?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Less brutalism.
No, more brutalism.
More brutalism.
Yeah.
All in.
Yeah. I think, that's something I'm still trying to figure out. And yeah, I do think there are a lot of myths about architecture and what it is, and what kind of people practice architecture. And I don't think there are enough, sort of variety of different perspectives about architecture. I think it's funny. I was talking to some people about this recently, because it's like architect, or one thing is like when you ask people who are not in the architecture industry to like name an architect, very often they can't name a single person, which I'm actually fine with, because for me, like, I don't think architecture is about like one person. Like, people don't realize like most projects, like even some of the smallest ones, are done by a group of people. It's not like one mastermind, and I think that's one of the myths. But like, I think the one architect where lots of people can name is Frank Lloyd Wright. But so then like that's the guy you have as an image of what an architect should be. And, he was very, successful architect, and definitely had like influenced a lot of people over time. But he also had a complicated life, and it not always described as the best person. So I feel like that also paints a picture of like, oh, like kind of like the tortured artist stereotype, but there's this like, the like mastermind architect stereotype that again, I just think it's really not true to reality. So I think maybe it's just about telling the story differently, and like showing that, yeah, like an architect can be doing many different types of things, um but kind of as I was mentioning earlier in the podcast, which is like, for me, for the longest time, architecture isn't about architecture. It's about like literally everything else, like what the building or the room or the interior space is made for, because the vast majority of the time, I'm talking to like office workers or hospital staff or students when we're designing a school. It's more about understanding what it is that people do in these spaces rather than the space itself. Since moving to Boston, I started working on science lab projects, which were a totally new typology for me. And there are times where I'm in a meeting and the clients will be talking about like science experiments they do, and I have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. And that's why some of the people we have on staff at where I work at Gensler are like subject matter experts, like people who have either backgrounds in science lab design, like a significant amount, or people who have sciences backgrounds themselves. And so kind of in architecture, whether it's in school or in workplaces, like we're always looking for people who are either multidisciplinary or literally come from a different industry so that they can inform us of what it is that we need to consider, as because when you're not in an industry, you don't necessarily know about the nuances. So and that's another message I try to communicate, which is like it's not just about like me as an expert about buildings. It's also about understanding other people with other expertise and try to have more than just a surface level conversation or understanding of those.
Well, I think that's a great sort of moment to wrap up on. And we have a common question which we end all our conversations with. I think if you ask us what the point of this endeavor, this show is, it's really to get at the essence of the moment we're in right now. I think there's a lot of change that's happening in the world, and the design fields are trying to grapple with it. You always have to deal with the fact that there's always an evolutionary disconnect between the built environment and our social environment. I think it's just happened at a slower rate. So we want to ask you, especially from the perspective of both an architect and a content creator, how would you describe the moment we're in right now? How are we going to look back on it from the next generation? See, this is, in the year 2024 to whatever period, this is what was happening, and where is it going to lead to?
Yeah. I'm really bad at predicting the future. But I think it just so happens right now is late October 2024, and I moved to the US a couple years ago, and I literally every day I'm getting like ads on my phone saying don't forget to vote or don't forget to register to vote, and it's like not an American. So, like I literally couldn't. And so there's always these other things that are top of mind because you're just exposed to it. Like I knew so a lot. I learned a lot about American, politics, even just living in Canada for a number of years. But you get exposed to it even more when you're here, and sometimes you just can't even look away, even if you wanted to. But I think again, as someone who's lived in a couple of other countries, like I think I try not to be so I guess like so tied to the current moment. And not to say that that's a bad thing, because obviously one of the reasons I'm less engaged is because I'm like, not that I have nothing to do with American politics, because obviously I do because I live here, but it's I'm not someone who is gonna make a difference in a way of using like my vote, at least not in this country. But I think like I try to like that's why I try to understand people of as many perspectives as I can, and I try to realize that even if someone is really different and who has a very different like cultural or political or a different perspective than me, that it's important to listen to them. So like I hope that we can look back on this moment and in the future and see you know similarities and collaboration and kind of mutual understanding. Like that's like my hope. It's probably literally the opposite of that in some circles right now, and it's hard to get out of that mindset. But what I think I would like to happen like in the future is just to have more people understand each other, which is again like what I not that I'm always successful, but what I try to do like when I create, whether it's YouTube videos or podcasts, is like I don't just want to engage with one type of audience. You can never, like you say, you can't please everyone, and you can never really speak to literally everyone. But I think at least I want to try to do that as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's related to what you were saying, right? Like, the more you understand of the subject or a different person or the differentials, the more you can engage and even maybe potentially like what you didn't like before. So I guess that's where you all start. So thank you, thank you so much, Betty, for being on our podcast today. It was really fun, and it was amazing and inspiring to hear your story of how you got here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for listening to me. It kind of going off. As I mentioned before I talked to you guys, sometimes I really like talking now, apparently, as someone who didn't talk a lot before. I guess I just trying to get out everything I didn't get out in the first couple of decades of my life.
It was super great. I think, a lot of it really resonated with us. Similar kind of sentiments, things that we're going through, things that we think about a lot. So really appreciate your perspective.
That's great.
All the challenges you went through to get here.
Thank you.
Talk so much.
Thank you so much.
Just on a last note, where can we find your work? We'll link to the show notes, but if you could just describe to the audience where they can follow.
I think so. Yeah, if you can follow me on, probably the place I'm at the most often is Instagram. So I'm at Articulations V. V stands for videos. I'm I'm on YouTube as Articulations. So you can see my videos there. But because I don't upload as often, Instagram is where like I'm more likely to be around, and that also has links to some of my the other contents that I create. If you, since people here like podcasts, you can always listen to Pictorial Podcasts, which is still available wherever you find podcasts.
All right, thank you. And
thank you so much.
For the listeners out there, please follow, subscribe Betty, and also Most Modern. Thanks, everyone.
Most modern.
Most modern.
Most modern.
Most modern. 모스트 포던 팟캐스트